Welcome to the Standardized Recipes Training Module, presented by the Maine Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs. This presentation will cover the importance of standardized recipes and how to develop them for use in your school nutrition programs. Before we can dive into the details of a standardized recipe, we must first know what it is. The USDA definition of a standardized recipe is a recipe that has been tried, adapted, and retried several times for use by a given food service operation and has been found to produce the same good results and yield every time when the exact procedures are used with the same type of equipment and the same quantity and quality of ingredients. Before we talk about all the great things about standardized recipes, I want to put the myths out on the table so then we can get rid of them. First, a lot of the things I hear about standardized recipes are that they lack creativity. They have a lower quality. Some people feel as though they cannot convert their own recipe to a standardized recipe. And a lot of people don't feel comfortable making substitutions for ingredients or seasonings within standardized recipes. So now we're going to get right into the benefits of standardized recipes and why do we use them. First, consistency. It ensures that the menu items will be produced the same way every time. The customer will know what to expect. Next, quality control. You know you have a good recipe that your customers enjoy. Give your customers what they want. Third, we have cost control. This should be the same every time the recipe is produced. A 5-cent cost increase per serving in an ingredient, for example, 5 extra pounds of ground beef are used while creating a recipe. This could potentially cost you 5 extra cents per serving. Say you serve about 200 servings. If this happened every single day, 160 school days, this could potentially be a $1,600 cost increase to your program. Meal crediting. You know your recipe meets the meal pattern, and you want to ensure that the product your kitchen is serving always meets the meal pattern. Simplified record keeping. You'll have an easier time filling out your production records since your recipe will tell you the info you need, like the recipe number or plan number of servings. And last but certainly not least is employee confidence. Standardized recipes help to eliminate guesswork, decrease the chance of mistakes, and help to prevent running out of food during meal service. It is important to know how your recipes credit. Being confident in how your recipes credit will help you and your staff know that you are meeting the meal pattern with a recipe that is reliable and your students enjoy. There are 3 steps to recipe standardization. The first step is recipe verification. This involves reviewing the recipe for crediting, preparing it, verifying the yield, and recording any changes that need to be made. The second step is product evaluation. This focuses on determining the acceptability of the product produced. Will your students enjoy it? Make sure to have those Try It Tuesdays or any other kind of sample day you can have and get the students' feedback. The third step to recipe standardization is quantity adjustment. This involves changing the yield and ingredient amounts accordingly, or scaling your recipe to suit the needs of your environment. So what can credited standardized recipes do for you? Like stated before, they help you plan your menus more confidently. They can help your administrative reviews go more smoothly. It helps us draw that straight line from recipe to production record to meal pattern. They help you know that you are meeting the meal pattern without over-serving, which over time can save your program a lot of money. So now we're going to break down the components of a recipe. First thing, you have your yield, or number of servings. You have your serving size, which is extremely important. One, for us to see that you're meeting the meal pattern, but two, for your servers to know that they are serving the right amount of food without under or over serving the students. You have your meal pattern contribution. You have your ingredients written in measurable terms. We have seen a lot of recipes that read, for example, 5 tomatoes. How do you know how to measure that? We credit vegetables in cups, so how would you credit 5 tomatoes? To make crediting easy, you should convert the amount of tomatoes needed to a volume. You could even convert it to a weight because the food buying guide is always available to help credit. And finally, you have clear directions. Clear directions on a recipe are especially important to ensure that all of your staff members know how the recipe needs to be put together. So let's look at a recipe. You'll see here the title of the recipe is right at the top. We have some main grain crepes with USDA strawberries. You'll see all of those components we just talked about are all highlighted in yellow. At the center, you have 50 servings. There's your yield. Down at the bottom left, you actually see your serving size. Bottom right, you see your meal pattern contribution. On the left-hand side of the recipe, you see your ingredients and the measurements for them. Notice how some of them are in weights and some are in volume. Flour is measured in weight and the fruit is in volume. This is how it credits towards the meal pattern. And then on the right, you see your directions. These are very nice, clear directions. There's a note on there that if this was a recipe that had a minimal internal cooking temp, like Hamburg or something like that, that is where you would also include any of those HACCP-related instructions: cooking temp, cooking instructions, storage instructions, etc. Some things to consider with standardized recipes. You want to make sure when you begin to create a standardized recipe, you convert those ingredients to the same format in which they credit. Like stated before, those tomatoes. You want to make sure that the ingredients in the recipe reflect what you will actually use in your kitchen. Make these adjustments ahead of time. For example, at home, you might use corn on the cob, but in a high volume situation, you're probably going to use frozen corn. So like spoken about before with the corn situation, you want to make sure you consider all possible substitutions that you would make for use in your operation. We have diced chicken or chicken strips, beef crumbles instead of raw beef, salsa for diced tomatoes, using one vegetable versus using a vegetable blend, and then fresh versus dried herbs. Of course, you want to make sure that you double check that crediting. We will now go step by step through the process of crediting and standardizing a recipe. Here we have a recipe for Mexican corn in a cup. The first thing you need to do when you're going to credit and standardize a recipe is identify the ingredients that can count towards the meal pattern. Here we have the corn can be credited towards your starchy vegetable, and we have cheese that can credit towards your meat alternate. So these two items are creditable, but it is easy to credit them in this format. Not so much. So now we have a few more steps we need to take. One of the best resources that we have is the online food buying guide. This is available online or through a downloadable app on a smartphone. When you go into your food buying guide, you want to look up your corn, for instance. Here, the food buying guide states that 1 medium ear corn is about a half a cup of cooked vegetable. So now we return to our recipe. It says that the food buying guide stated that 1 ear of corn is approximately half a cup. So this recipe would provide you with 4 half-cup servings. Next, we're going to look at the cheese. According to the food buying guide, a 1 ounce serving, or approximately 3/8 of a cup, will provide you with a 1 ounce meat alternate. This recipe called for 8 tablespoons, which in volume, according to this measurement conversion chart, is about a half a cup. So now we have a little bit of math to do. The recipe here called for 8 tablespoons, a half a cup, but for a 1 ounce meat alternate, we need 3/8 of a cup. So after doing some math, the recipe will provide us with a total of 1.333 ounce equivalents of meat alternate, which gives you about 0.333 ounce equivalents per serving. And in our case, we round down, so each serving of this will give you a 0.25 ounce equivalent of meat alternate. In this particular case, this is going to be a side dish, so hitting that meat alternate might not be necessary, but it's always important to have that information on hand. So now here we have our standardized style recipe. We have our serving size, which would be a half a cup. This recipe will yield 4 servings. We then have our meal crediting, which is a half a cup of starchy veg and that 0.25 ounce equivalent meat alternate. You'll see when we get down to the ingredients that we have exchanged the corn on the cob for frozen corn and changed it to a volume amount. We have also opted to list the cheese ingredient as Parmesan cheese because that was an option. The cojita cheese is not exactly a common item found in school nutrition programs. And down at the bottom, you'll see that we have our clear directions for use. One thing to note is that we have left this recipe at 4 servings. The next step that you would want to take in your program is to convert it to the amount of servings that you need for your kitchen. Now we're going to look into how this can simplify your record keeping. Back on that previous slide, all that information we needed for this production record was available. You have your menu item, which is your Mexican corn. We have chosen to name this vegetable 1 as the recipe. The recipe told us that our serving size is a half a cup. And it also told us that this recipe will provide you with a half a cup starchy veg and 0.25 ounce equivalent meat alternate. This concludes our presentation on standardized recipes. I hope that you've been able to take something from this presentation today. If you would like any other information regarding standardized recipes or any kind of menu planning, you can visit our child nutrition website. Thank you for your time.